This is a pre-release unit of the Lethal Gaming Gear LA-1, which Lethal Gaming Gear did send out to us. And today, we'll be taking an in-depth look at its shape, comparing it to other mice on the market, and going over my grip recommendations for the mouse, so you can get an idea of what it'll be like when it does release. For reference, my hands are around 18.5 by 10 centimeters. Looking at the mouse, the LA-1 has a low profile feel. The buttons are quite low with narrow comfort grooves that guide my fingers directly to their lowest point, giving the LA-1 a very locked in, precise feel. This precise feel is further augmented by the narrow grip width of the mouse, and overall it feels like I have a lot of control on the LA-1. The hump of the mouse is catered towards the back and has a slight diamond shape to it, allowing for a good amount of palm contact, which helps add stability for the mouse. Lethal Gaming Gear has said that the LA-1 mainly takes inspiration from two shapes, those being the Endgame Gear XM1 or XM2 shape, and the Zowie ZA13. The LA-1 and the XM2 have a similar side profile, but overall feel extremely different. For one, the LA-1 is a lot thinner than the XM2 at every point, and has much less aggressive side curvature. The wider and more angled back flare of the XM2 does create a better spot to brace the thumb and pinky against than the back flare on the LA-1, but also restricts your grip more. The side ledging on the LA-1 is also thinner and less angled than on the XM2. Side ledging makes mice easier to lift and also angles the fingers to prevent hand cramping. Both mice are easy to lift and don't lead to hand cramping. However, if you have narrower hands, the XM2 will force you to wrap your fingers over and around the ledges, whereas this is not an issue on the LA-1. The hump on the LA-1 is a bit narrower than that of the XM2, meaning it doesn't push my pinky knuckle as far out, and makes it easier for me to place my pinky finger on the mouse when I extend it. The XM2 has a more rounded hump which pushes deeper into the hand, leading to a lot of contact throughout the whole palm. The LA-1 meanwhile does still make light contact with deep areas of the palm, but more heavily contacts the sides of the palm due to the flatter nature of the hump. The lack of deep contact when compared to the XM2 makes the LA-1 a bit less stable, but also lower and less intrusive, making me feel more controlled on the LA-1. For those who utilize inner hand micro adjustments, the LA-1 will have a bit more freedom than the XM2 due to the lower feeling and less intrusive hump. And finally, the button design on the two mice is quite different. The XM2 lacks comfort grooves altogether, which has always been my biggest issue with the mouse, as I often have difficulty consistently aligning my grip on the XM2. The LA-1 meanwhile has deep comfort grooves, which ensure that I always grip the mouse at the same angle. Overall, the LA-1 feels thinner, lower, and just smaller when compared to the XM2. The LA-1 in a lot of ways feels like a much safer and more toned down version of the ZA13. Looking at the side curvature, the two mice are similar in width. The LA-1 has a slightly narrower grip width, but almost entirely lacks a front flare when compared to the ZA13. The front flare on the ZA13 may offer a bit more support for those who extend their ring and pinky fingers, but would also be a little less safe in the flatter sides on the LA-1. Most notably, the ZA13 has a hump which peaks at a much higher point and contacts my knuckles, whereas the top of the hump on the LA-1 is much lower and a bit wider. The hump of the ZA13 is also flatter at the back than the LA-1. Pretty much all of the palm contact I have with the ZA13 is towards the sides of my palm, whereas the LA-1 does give me at least some deep palm contact. The only major way that the LA-1 is less safe than the ZA13 is the button design, as the LA-1 has deeper comfort grooves which guide the fingers to a more specific position. There are two mice which have come out since the announcement of the LA-1 which I feel are much closer to it than either the ZA13 or the XM2. Those two mice being the Ninjutso Sora and the controversial Darmoshark M3-S. The Sora is a slimmed down and flattened version of the XM2, which brings it closer to the LA-1. Size-wise, these two mice are fairly similar, though the LA-1 is a bit thinner and taller than the Sora. The LA-1 also has flatter sides and thinner, less angled side ledging than the Sora, making it a bit safer. The narrow nature of the hump on the Sora prevents my palm from contacting most of it unless I rest my hand on the mouse and floating above the pad. The LA-1 has a wider and more pronounced hump than the Sora, which fills out my palm a lot better and gives me more stability when aiming. Darmoshark has been accused of copying the LA-1 to create the M3-S, as the dimensions of the mice do look strikingly close. However, in mice, it's the subtle details that matter. And while there are a lot of similarities between the LA-1 and the M3-S, there are a few significant differences. The rounder and more pronounced hump of the M3-S fills out more of my palm and pushes my hand back at a higher angle, which gives me more stability on the mouse. However, the lower hump on the LA-1 gives me just enough of a sensation of pushing the mouse against the pad, allowing me to have finer control on it than on the M3-S. The lower hump of the LA-1 is also a bit more suited for small fingertip-based micro adjustments than the larger hump of the M3-S. The side curvature on the two mice is also a bit different, with the M3-S tapering in later than the LA-1, which results in my ring and pinky finger being pushed a bit more forward on it. The M3-S also flares into a sharp corner at the front of the mouse, whereas the LA-1 does not have as aggressive of a front flare and is a bit more rounded at the front corner. This can make the LA-1 a bit more comfortable for those who wrap their fingers around the front corner of the mouse. While both mice have significant comfort grooving on the buttons, the comfort grooves on the LA-1 are a lot narrower and guide the fingers to a more specific spot than the wider comfort grooves on the M3-S. So is the M3-S a clone of the LA-1? With the dimensions so similar, as well as the whole factory situation, it's hard for me to say that Darmoshark wasn't at least inspired by Lethal Gaming Gear's design. But overall, the two mice are different enough shapes that those looking for a budget LA-1 will not necessarily find it in the M3-S. Now, I'll be briefly comparing the LA-1 to other popular claw grip wireless mice. Compared to the Pulsar X2, the LA-1 is similar in length and height, however the X2 has much flatter sides and is way wider at the grip than the LA-1. Compared to the Lamzu Atlantis, much of what I said about the XM2 still applies here. And finally, the Lamzu Atlantis Mini is just a lot smaller than the LA-1, and has that aggressive side ledging which can be polarizing. Personally, I find the LA-1 very good for various types of tracking-based aim, and I play better on this mouse than any other. Before we get into my grip recommendations, I am a slave to the YouTube analytic gods, so I'm gonna tell you to like, comment, and subscribe. I would most recommend the LA-1 for aggressive claw grip for those with 17x9 to 21x11cm hands, relaxed claw for those with 16x9 to 20x11cm hands, pincer claw for those with 17x10 to 22x12cm hands, knuckle claw for those with hands larger than 17x9cm, any kind of fingertip grip for those with hands larger than 19x9cm, and relaxed fingertip for those with 18x9 to 21x11cm hands. The LA-1 remains a unique shape and easily one of the best claw grip shapes on the market.